All right, continuing on from the feudal system, we need to go with the Carolingian dynasty because it helps cement. They do a lot of things. They help cement the relationship between the Pope and the monarchs of Europe, and they also unify a large area of Europe before a couple of brothers ruin it by going to war with each other, and that's how we get Germany and France. But the Frankish kingdom the Franks are a group of people that lived in eastern France and western Germany. And when Rome died, they gained independence and started carving out their own little area. Our story begins, though, with Charles Martel. We covered Charles Martel with Islam. Charles Martel was the king of the Franks, and he smashed the Umayyad invasion at Tours with his heavy cavalry. But what Charles Martel and his predecessors were doing is they were slowly consolidating their lands in Germany and France until it covered a humongous area. I mean, the majority of West Germany and France and Switzerland and the Low Countries were controlled by the Frankish kingdoms in some way or form. But Charles Martel does the one thing that you shouldn't do if you were in charge, and then he dies. Just dies of old age or natural causes. It's not important how he dies. But he leaves his kingdom to his son, who is now known by history as Pepin the Short. With Pepin the Short, we don't know if he was like 5'3". There are some rumors that he was like 6'8". Some people think that he just talked really fast and was very brief with people. But Pepin the Short talks to the Pope and says, "Hey, do I have your blessing to set up this kingdom and make it like the official king of the area?" The Pope's like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" But Pepin has to do one thing first, and that is invade Italy and kick out these people known as the Lombards who lived in the provinces of northern Italy to stop harassing the Pope. Also, during this time, the Pope is a spiritual leader when it comes to the Catholic Church, but he's also a feudal leader of an area of land that's known as the Papal States. The Papal States used to be an actual like codified country. It's a relatively large area up until 1871 when Giuseppe Garibaldi marches on it and tells the Pope that he's part of Italy now. Also, fun fact, the United States is actually older than Germany and Italy as actual unified nations. Bet you didn't know that. Now you do. But Pepin secures pretty much his crown and his throne, and the Pope's like, "Yeah, sure, you're the king of the Franks. I like it. You're a cool dude." But Pepin does the one thing that you should never do, and he dies. And he leaves his kingdom to his son, Charlemagne. It's not Charlemagne, Charlemagne. And Charlemagne is a very ambitious person. He wants to create a new golden age. He teaches himself how to read and write. He also teaches himself Latin. He wants to emulate the old Roman emperors. And he wants to do whatever he can to solidify power. And that, what he views, what he does is he views that the Catholic Church is the way to do that, because if he can have everybody worship one religion and have the blessing of the leader of that religion, then he's going to gain a lot of political power. So he gets all friendly with the Pope, and the Lombards are at it again. And so Charlemagne takes his army down to Italy again, and he kicks the Lombards out, but not before getting in cahoots with the Pope and being like, "Look, if I do something for you, you gotta do something for me." And so the Pope gives Charlemagne a Christmas present, and that Christmas present is he's now proclaimed the Roman Emperor, but it's not really in Italy. What happens is there's a creation of this thing known as the Holy Roman Empire, which is a feudal system with the Carolingians as the head of it. And on Christmas Day in 800 AD, Charlemagne swears fealty to the Pope. He swears allegiance to the Pope, and they recognize each other. Game recognizes game, and you have the Holy Roman Empire. And Charlemagne does a lot of great things for the Holy Roman Empire. He builds roads, he builds schools, he builds churches, all the things that like the Romans would do. He tries to extend Roman and Frankish ideals to all of his empire to try to create a common culture to make everybody, you know, feel kind of patriotic and try to follow suit. But there are longer lasting effects of his actions, one of which is the Pope being a political entity and the Pope having the ability to actually command authority from the papacy in Rome. Beforehand, the Pope might be able to only issue a couple of papal bulls or edicts, or a papal bull is just like a decree given by the Pope. But this tremendously increases the church's power because now the church is intertwined with the government, and later on, the Pope has the ability to call crusades and declare inquisitions. But it unites Western Europe under one banner, and that's Charlemagne's banner. This doesn't last long, though, however. I believe it's either Charlemagne's heir or Charlemagne's grandkids. What happens is, whoever it is, I should probably pause and Google this, but I don't feel like doing that right now because I want to just get these done. They split the kingdom into three parts, and each son gets one part. One son gets one part. One son gets the left part. One son gets the center part, and one son gets the right part. And what happens is the person that gets the center part, so it runs from the bottom of Denmark down through the Black Forest into northern Italy and through the Swiss Alps. It's not a very defendable location, so the two other brothers invade him and they divide the land. And these lands pretty much form the borders of France and Germany, like the modern day borders. That's why the borders between France and Germany are very odd culturally, is because they're not quite entirely German, they're not quite entirely French, they're like a blend. And yeah, that's like Charlemagne and stuff. I'm gonna check my time real quick if I can find my. All right, I've still got about 8 minutes left, so I'm just going to keep on going. And now, time to talk about the Saxons and the Angles. Talking about invaders, so we're going to have the Magyars and the Vikings and all that. Ignore the SpongeBob meme, we'll get to that. But you have the Saxons and the Angles. Charlemagne's empire didn't incorporate all of France and Germany. It incorporated the vast majority, but there are still independent tribes of people throughout. Two of those are the Angles that live in Denmark, or back then known as Anglia, and the Saxons that lived in Saxony, which is also, they're called Saxons. Historians don't name things that cleverly. But the Angles and the Saxons are able to remain independent, and they develop their own culture. And part of that culture is, since they're on the coast, they have a very rich shipbuilding tradition. So they like to build ships, and they like to conquer things, and they're very strong warlords. And so the Saxons and the Angles go around raiding. Now, these aren't exactly Vikings. The Vikings mostly inhabit Scandinavia, so Norway, Finland, and even parts of Sweden. But the Angles and the Saxons pretty much go about conquering, and the Angles actually wind up invading England, and they wind up conquering the majority of England. So, Angles and the Saxons, war bands go into England, they invade it, and they pretty much kick out the native rulers who are former Romans or Celtic peoples. And the Anglo-Saxons rule England until 1066, when the Normans, who are Vikings who live in northern France, invade and established modern-day England. But these people are just invaders. They like to kill. They're good at fighting. And if you're good at fighting, you can typically take over most places. Next up, you have the Magyars. It's not just Magyars. Magyars are Central Asian nomads, which means that they ride bows and shoot horses. And they might also, since they're nomadic, they follow their herds, much like the Mongols, and they wind up just settling in Eastern Europe. They cut a kingdom out from themselves, and they rule Hungary for a good bit. Eventually, they do become Christianized, and just with mixing with the locals, form the modern-day countries of Romania and Hungary. Very straightforward stuff, but no one cares about that. Everyone cares about the Vikings. I like the Vikings. He's pretty cool. Fun fact, Vikings didn't wear horned helmets. that's actually based off a German opera. I'm sure you've all seen like the J.G. Wentworth commercials with like the woman with like the spiked bra singing about getting your cash annuities cash now. Yeah, horned helmets are just a myth from that. But the Vikings come from Scandinavia. Scandinavia is above Denmark. It is very cold and very barren. Um, Very hard to grow food there. And so a big thing that the Vikings have to do is to, in order to survive, they have to invade other places and they have to raid. And they're able to do so with their ships. They're some of the best shipbuilders in all of Europe. They create this ship known as the longboat. And a longboat's at least this big. Right now, I'm holding my hands out about 2 feet apart, but they're at least that big. And the longboats are extremely effective because not only can they handle deep sea ocean voyages, so sailing from Denmark and Norway over into England, they can also sail upriver. So you're able to have a boat that can maneuver in deep water or in shallow water. So if there's a location that's on a river or a body of water, guess what? It's not safe from the Vikings. And so the Vikings pretty much terrorize the coasts of Europe, and not even just the coast of Europe. They actually sail up the river like Seine or whatever it's called in France, Seine. I'm from this county. I ain't got to pronounce words right. And they actually loot Paris. But the Vikings go about and just kind of ruin people's days. They kick over like their tables. They like spray paint wieners on buildings. They're just relatively rude people. And they strike fear into the hearts of Europeans. And all of these invaders actually enforce the feudal system because if you're just a lowly peasant just trying to, grow some barley or trying to get that bread, you're afraid of getting murdered. And if there's a Viking warband or a Magyar warband or an Anglo-Saxon warband coming to your town, you and your fellow villagers probably can't hold them off. So what you have to do is you have to give more power to the feudal lords, which in turn creates helps jumpstart the feudal system. It also disrupts trade. If you're afraid that you're going to get murdered, then you're probably not going to trade and stuff like that. Ignore this. You can look at this if you want to on the notes, but this is just main ideas if we were taking the SOLs. But you kids are smart, and I know you all listen to me because you care about learning so much. Just the main ideas. Also, I forgot to mention, if you email your work to me, that's completely fine. I ask that you do it on Friday. That way I don't have to go through my email and hunt your work down. That way it doesn't get lost. Let me just check the time one more again. Still got a minute and a half left. Let's see, I mentioned to the notes I went over the emailing. Oh yeah, and the due dates. The due dates on Echo, they're not really set in stone. I just want to talk about this real quick. I put the due dates on just to give y'all an idea of when to get work done. Also, it puts the zero in just because eventually in May when I have to grade and give you the extra credit, which I'm perfectly okay with. It just makes grading easier for me. We're living through a pandemic right now. I'm not going to be that much of a hard butt over grades. It's just to help me grade later on. I don't want to cause any of y'all undue stress because, things kind of suck right now. And that's pretty much it. Hope y'all are staying safe, social distance, play some video games, stare at the wall, walk on the sun, do whatever you